"Open the door. This is an HOA compliance check." That was the first thing the Marine heard as the master key twisted inside the lock, a sound that never should have been there, a voice that never belonged on the other side of his family's door. The knob clicked, the hinge eased, and the president of the association stepped inside like she owned the hallway. She swept her flashlight through the living room, muttering about violations, unaware that someone trained to handle far worse than her petty authority was already standing in the dark. He stepped forward, calm and still, and her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the empty house she always trespassed into. This time, someone was waiting. "By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below." What she didn't know yet was simple. The man she targeted had built his life around boundaries, and someone was about to defend them. He didn't rush in, didn't raise his voice, didn't mirror her panic. He stayed steady in that hallway, watching her stumble backward with a fear she'd never felt when she thought no one could stop her. He was home, on medical leave, recovering, but that didn't make him any less of a Marine. And in the silence that followed her startled gasp, the truth settled between them. She'd crossed a line only one family in this neighborhood was prepared to push back against. Elias arrived home 30 minutes later, unaware that everything had just shifted. He parked his old sedan under the street lamp, the same place he'd left it every night after finishing repairs across Hawthorne Ridge. The neighborhood slept quietly behind manicured hedges and painted shutters, but something in the air felt heavier when he stepped out. Marcus was already waiting by the door, leaning against the frame like he'd been guarding it. His eyes carried that clear, sharpened focus, the look he only used when something wasn't right. Elias paused before crossing the threshold. He'd lived under people like the HOA president for years, their clipped tones and dismissive glances, their way of treating him like he was part of the maintenance equipment and not a resident. He had learned to swallow it, to let the small injustices slide, because raising Marcus mattered more than winning battles over landscaping citations. But when his son told him what happened, how she opened their home without a knock, stepped into the hallway uninvited, something settled inside him with a weight that didn't fade. He listened without interrupting. That was always his way. Let the truth come out fully before reacting. Marcus described the moment the lock turned, the way she held her flashlight like an officer checking a crime scene, the excuses she made when she realized she wasn't alone. He explained how he'd stood there, not threatening, not moving in aggression, just asserting the boundary she'd violated. Elias nodded slowly, absorbing every detail. His calm. "It wasn't passivity. It was discipline. Before the injury forced him into the maintenance role he worked now, he'd spent years in military intelligence, analyzing breaches, gathering traces, reconstructing events that others thought were invisible. That training didn't leave him. It simply lay dormant beneath his quiet routine. He stepped toward the door, running his thumb across the lock. A small scrape caught his attention, thin as a pencil line, but fresh enough to stand out beneath the porch light. Marcus mentioned hearing a faint metallic chirp when the key turned. That wasn't typical of a manual entry. That chirp belonged to an internal sensor, the kind that registered override attempts. Elias knew these systems better than anyone in Hawthorne Ridge. He maintained them. He fixed them when board members accidentally damaged them. He understood their redundancies, especially the ones Karen didn't know existed. He exhaled once, long and controlled. There were rules about master keys, strict rules, legal boundaries, and she had crossed every one. Marcus watched him carefully. "Dad, she's done this before, hasn't she?" Elias didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. The silence between them was confirmation enough. Inside, the house felt different. Not unsafe, but disturbed, like someone had rearranged the air. Elias noticed details others would ignore. The faint shift in the doormat fibers, the misaligned light switch Karen must have brushed, the footprint turned slightly toward the hallway where she shouldn't have been. Each sign added to a picture forming in his mind, not just of the break-in, but of her confidence, her assumption that this family would never fight back. He sat at the kitchen table, Marcus across from him. The Marine's voice steadied as he recounted everything, and Elias listened with a father's patience and a tactician's clarity. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't an inconvenience. This was a violation, one committed by someone drunk on rules she didn't understand and authority she wasn't meant to wield. But Elias wasn't angry in the way she expected. He wasn't loud, wasn't emotional. He was gathering pieces, forming a path, letting the weight of the truth settle into something sharp and undeniable. Because in Hawthorne Ridge, Karen believed she controlled everything: the rules, the keys, the image of order. Tonight, for the first time, she made a mistake. She chose the wrong house. She chose the wrong son. And she chose the wrong man to underestimate. Elias stayed seated at the kitchen table long after Marcus finished recounting every detail of the break-in. The house was quiet now, but not the peaceful kind, more like the held breath before a storm. He rested his palms against the wood surface and let the silence settle, the weight of what happened sinking deeper with every passing second. Marcus watched him carefully, knowing his father never reacted impulsively. If anything, the stillness meant something was forming behind that calm exterior. Elias finally stood, walked to the door, and crouched beside the lock again. The porch light caught the faint scrape near the key slot, the one Marcus had mentioned. He traced it with a slow, controlled motion, as if reading a pattern no one else could see. "She didn't just test the door," he murmured. "She used the override point." Marcus stiffened, recognizing the tone, soft, analytical, but edged with certainty. The override was supposed to be used only in emergencies, fires, medical crises, smelling gas, not curtain colors, not compliance fantasies, not whatever justification Karen invented for herself. Elias opened the inside panel beneath the knob, exposing the small diagnostic LED most residents didn't even know existed. The indicator blinked twice, an error log signal. That alone was enough to prove someone used an unauthorized access method. He rose to his feet again, expression unchanged but gaze sharpened. "We're not letting this slide," he said quietly, not angry, not loud, just final. Marcus nodded, reassured by the steadiness in his father's voice. Elias never promised consequences lightly. When he did, it meant he already saw the end of the road, even if others didn't yet. He moved to the small desk in the living room and pulled out the maintenance-issued tablet he used for repair reports. It wasn't connected to the main console. It operated through a secondary channel used only for logging outages and emergencies. Karen forgot one crucial truth about Hawthorne Ridge's systems. Not even the HOA president had the technical access Elias did. She could override an entry. She could delete the surface-level logs residents saw. But she couldn't erase diagnostic fragments stored in the device Elias carried, because the system treated him as part of its emergency network, not the residential one she manipulated. He powered on the tablet, navigated to the Access Diag interface, and began scrolling through the metadata. Marcus leaned in. "You think she left something behind?" Elias didn't look up. Everyone leaves something behind. The timestamp appeared almost instantly, an anomalous spike at the exact moment Marcus heard the chirp, a sensor ping, a failed authentication, a backdoor override. Elias tapped the log, isolating the fragments. Marcus frowned. "Wait, is that enough to accuse her?" "No," Elias replied steadily. "It's enough to prove she touched the door, but the accusation has to be built on more than a single trace." "So what do? We watch, we collect, and we don't rush." This was how Elias always operated. When he'd worked in military intelligence, he'd learned that truth meant nothing unless it was airtight. But once it was airtight, it could topple anyone, regardless of their rank. Everyone in Hawthorne Ridge saw him as the quiet maintenance guy who fixed light fixtures and patched sprinkler lines. They forgot that assessing breaches had once been his entire life. The next morning brought no calm. Karen arrived at his door with a clipboard, 2 board members trailing her like silent ornaments. She wore her authority like a uniform, her voice sharp as she announced a formal HOA warning for hostile behavior exhibited by household occupants. Marcus had to grip the back of a dining chair just to stop himself from reacting. Elias stepped forward instead. He didn't counter her accusations, didn't deny anything. He simply said, "Noted," and accepted the paper she handed him. Something about his calm unsettled her. She expected shouting, panic, defense. She expected him to fold. Instead, he stepped aside, hands loose at his sides, letting her ramble about safety protocols and compliance breaches. The board members lingered behind her with discomfort in their eyes. They weren't used to seeing someone meet her storm with quiet certainty. When she left, Marcus stared at his father. "Dad, she's twisting everything." "I know. You're not even going to argue?" "There's no point arguing with someone who thinks control is a right," Elias said. "You don't fight someone like her head on. You let them reveal themselves." He spent the next hour inspecting every corner of the hallway she had walked through, noting displaced fibers, subtle dust shifts, the narrow trail where her shoe had scuffed the laminate. He wasn't collecting this for drama. He was building a timeline, a sequence, a story built from facts she couldn't distort. Marcus watched his father move with quiet precision. "I get it now," he muttered. "This is different." "It's necessary," Elias replied. Outside, a few neighbors peeked from porches, whispering about the sudden warning Karen issued. They weren't defending Elias yet, but something in their expressions hinted they'd grown tired of her tyrannical routines. If they were given the truth, real, verifiable truth, they might listen. Inside, Elias returned to the tablet, sorting logs into a folder labeled Incident. He didn't intend to weaponize the data recklessly. He intended to use it where it mattered, in a place Karen couldn't silence him. The HOA public meeting. He took a slow breath, grounding himself. This wasn't retaliation. This was correction. This was a line finally being redrawn. Elias closed the tablet. "This ends on our terms," he said. For the first time since the break-in, Marcus smiled, not out of relief, but recognition. His father wasn't angry. He was preparing. Elias didn't rest after saying the words that set their direction. Instead, he stored the tablet inside the drawer near the kitchen entrance and let the weight of the decision settle into the room. Marcus watched him with a steady gaze, understanding now that his father wasn't planning a confrontation. He was assembling a case, a real one. The kind that didn't crack under pressure. Outside, the world felt too calm compared to what was brewing inside their home. It didn't take long for the next move to come. Karen never allowed time for peace. By mid-morning, her SUV rolled up to the curb with the precision of someone who believed the neighborhood revolved around her schedule. She stepped out dressed for authority. Pressed blazer, heavy perfume, clipboard clutched like a badge. 2 board members followed, looking more like they regretted being dragged along than eager to support her. Elias had expected this visit. His calm earlier had unsettled her, and people like Karen reacted to unease by doubling down on control. When she approached the porch, he was already there, holding the door open slightly, not as an invitation, but as a quiet demonstration that he was prepared. She launched into her speech without greeting. "We received additional reports regarding your property's non-compliance. Curtains, landscaping, visual uniformity. None of this meets community standards." Her tone suggested she expected Elias to shrink back. He didn't move. He simply looked down at the paper she held out. "Report it," he said, with a smoothness that immediately threw her off balance. Behind her, neighbors walked dogs and watered lawns. A few slowed down, drawn by the tension they could feel from a distance. They weren't close enough to hear the details, but everyone in Hawthorne Ridge knew the posture of confrontation, especially when Karen initiated it. Her jaw tightened. "You're accumulating violations rapidly. If this continues, the board may have to consider suspension of certain resident privileges." Marcus, standing just behind his father, let out a short, disbelieving breath, but Elias raised a quiet hand, grounding the moment. "No problem," Elias replied, voice level. "If there's an official process, follow it." Karen blinked. She wasn't used to someone agreeing so calmly with her threats. She thrived on panic and resistance. Compliance made her suspicious. "And regarding the incident your son fabricated—" "He didn't fabricate anything," Elias said, not raising his voice. The softness made the statement firmer. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen immediately waved off the discomfort. "Well, regardless, you need to understand we can't tolerate misinformation about HOA officers." Elias nodded once. "Then I'm sure you'll be comfortable verifying everything at the next safety review meeting." Her eyes flashed. "Safety review? You scheduled it for next week," he said. "It's on the community calendar." Karen stiffened. She hadn't expected him to know that. She especially hadn't expected him to bring it up with the confidence of someone already preparing for it. She muttered something under her breath and turned away, motioning her entourage to follow. As she walked off, a few neighbors exchanged glances, quiet acknowledgments that something wasn't adding up. When she disappeared around the corner, Marcus exhaled. "Dad, she's spiraling." "That's what happens when someone used to power feels it slipping," Elias replied. Inside, he headed straight for his desk again, pulling out the folder where he stored the printed copies of the violations she had issued. Some were absurd. One claiming the shade of the mailbox didn't meet updated HOA tones, another complaining the lawn height exceeded community limits by half an inch. He sorted them carefully, placing the ones issued after the break-in at the front. Marcus sat on the arm of the couch. "So what's the plan? Just let her keep digging her own hole?" "People like her expose themselves," Elias said softly. "You just have to make sure the truth is visible when they do." He moved to the hallway and snapped a clear photo of the scrape on the lock, ensuring the angle captured the depth and direction. He also photographed the slight misalignment in the frame where her entry shifted the door inward. These weren't dramatic signs, nothing obvious enough for police yet, but taken with the digital logs and Marcus's eyewitness account, they formed a pattern that mattered. Marcus studied him for a long moment. "This isn't the first time she's done this, is it?" Elias didn't hide it anymore. "No. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want you carrying weight you shouldn't have to," he said quietly. "You were focused on your training." Marcus looked away, jaw tightening. "She had no idea I was coming home." "And that's the only reason she made a mistake this big," Elias replied. Their conversation paused when a soft knock sounded at the door. For a moment Marcus tensed, but Elias shook his head. When he opened it, the tension in the room eased. It wasn't Karen. It was Mr. Dre, their neighbor from across the street, a quiet man who rarely got involved in HOA affairs. He held a small notice in hand. I just wanted to ask something," Dre said uncertainly. "Did Karen file a violation against you today? For curtains?" Elias nodded. Dre exhaled. "She tried filing one against me for lawn edging. I've lived here 15 years, never had a problem until she took charge. This wasn't gossip, this was confirmation, another resident experiencing the same abuse." Elias didn't say much, but he listened, and Dre's quiet frustration made the situation feel less isolated, more exposed. As the man walked back across the street, Marcus met his father's eyes again. "She's losing the neighborhood," he said softly. "No," Elias corrected. "She's showing the neighborhood who she really is." And he intended to make sure everyone saw it clearly. Elias watched Dre walk back across the street. The man's shoulders slumped in that familiar way. People carried when they'd finally given up on being treated fairly. When the door clicked shut behind him, the house settled into a quiet that felt heavier than it had the night before. Marcus stood near the window, arms folded, watching Karen's SUV circle the far end of the block like a patrol car. She was making her presence known. That alone told Elias she wasn't done escalating. He moved to the desk again, sorting the papers Karen had issued and placing Dre's verbal account into context. Patterns. That was always his strength, finding the threads that connected behavior, timing, and motive. This wasn't about curtains or lawns. It wasn't even about authority. It was about domination. Karen didn't want compliance. She wanted submission. The more residents resisted, the more aggressively she pushed. Marcus leaned against the wall. "You think she's going to come back today?" "She hasn't gotten what she wanted yet," Elias said softly. "So yes, she'll come." He wasn't wrong. 20 minutes later, the familiar sound of Karen's heels echoed across the pavement. She didn't walk fast, didn't walk slow. She walked like she expected the world to wait for her footsteps. Elias glanced through the window and saw she wasn't alone. 2 different board members followed her this time. The rotation of her entourage meant she was trying to spread her narrative, trying to show force without acknowledging how thin her support had become. She walked up the path with a bright, falsely polite smile plastered on her face. Elias opened the door before she could knock. Marcus stayed in the hallway, just far enough back to show restraint, but close enough to be witness. Elias kept his stance neutral, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe. "Good afternoon," Karen said, syrupy sweet. "We'll need interior access today to perform a compliance walkthrough." The audacity was almost breathtaking. "This isn't an emergency," Elias replied. "You're not permitted to enter." Her smile thinned. "As HOA president, I'm authorized to conduct annual interior checks." "That's incorrect," Elias said. No anger, just clarity. Interior checks require written notice and resident consent. One of the board members shifted awkwardly. Karen shot him a sharp look before turning back. Refusal to cooperate may result in fines. Then issue them, Elias said. Behind her, a few neighbors paused mid-walk, drawn again by the unmistakable tone of confrontation. People in Hawthorne Ridge avoided conflict unless something truly mattered. The fact that more heads turned today than yesterday wasn't coincidence. Karen cleared her throat dramatically. "There's been talk," she said, voice pitched loud enough for nearby residents. "That your son—" Elias cut her off with a level gaze. "Careful." She inhaled, preparing another accusation, but something about the warning in his voice made her swallow the rest of the sentence. Still, she pushed forward. "We've received reports that he intimidated an HOA officer." "If standing in his own hallway counts as intimidation," Elias replied, "that says more about the officer than it does about him." The board members exchanged glances again. Even they couldn't defend that logic. Karen huffed, flipping her clipboard aggressively. "I will be documenting your non-compliance, your refusal to cooperate, and any threats made by household occupants." "Document whatever you like," Elias said. "Just make sure it's accurate this time." That landed, hard. Her face flushed as she spun on her heels and marched back toward her SUV, board members scrambling behind her. But what she didn't realize was that neighbors had recorded bits of the interaction. Phones lowered only when her SUV finally turned out of sight. Inside, Elias took a slow breath. He wasn't rattled. He had expected exactly this. Marcus approached him with a small smile of disbelief. "You really know how to get under her skin." "She's not used to people being calm," Elias said. "She's used to fear. And now she's desperate." He returned to the desk again, organizing the evidence with almost ritualistic precision. The violation notices, photos of the lock, the digital log fragments extracted from the maintenance tablet. He wasn't reacting. He was preparing, step by step, building the foundation of something she couldn't outrun. That afternoon, Elias took a slow walk around the neighborhood. Not for leisure, he wanted to observe, learn, gauge the climate. People greeted him, some cautiously, others with quiet appreciation. A few whispered that Karen had tried filing violations against them too. One elderly woman admitted she stopped gardening because she feared another citation. Another said Karen threatened to fine her for a wreath that wasn't seasonally appropriate. The stories piled up, each one validating what Elias already suspected. This wasn't about a single event. This was a pattern of abuse. He returned home with a clearer picture than ever before. Marcus sat on the couch, cleaning his brace as part of his recovery routine. "How bad is it out there?" "Worse than we knew," Elias said. "But it also means something else." "What's that?" "She's alone. People tolerate power until it threatens them directly. Then they start paying attention." Marcus nodded slowly. "So, the neighborhood's waking up." "Not yet," Elias said. "But they're looking, and when people look closely enough, truth becomes harder to hide." That night, Elias sat at the kitchen table again, this time with a notepad. He wrote down a timeline, every violation, every confrontation, every inconsistency. It wasn't for drama, it was for clarity. The same clarity he used to build military intelligence packets years ago. He wasn't reporting her yet. Not until it was complete. Marcus glanced over. "This ends at the meeting, doesn't it?" "Yes," Elias said quietly. "And she won't see it coming." Elias stayed at the table long after Marcus went to bed, the notepad still open to the timeline he'd been building. Every line dated, every violation written in the exact order it happened, every inconsistency highlighted. The house was still, the kind of quiet that usually meant rest, but tonight it carried purpose instead, a sense that something important had begun to take shape. When he finally closed the notepad, he felt that old familiar steadiness settle into his chest. Not anger, not fear, readiness. Morning came with a knock he'd been expecting. Not Karen this time, someone more predictable. A courier hired by the HOA delivered another violation notice, sealed in an envelope as if it were some official government directive. Elias accepted it without a word, thanked the courier, and shut the door gently. He didn't even unfold the letter. He placed it beside the others, forming a stack that spoke louder than anything written inside them. Marcus walked in, still adjusting the supportive brace on his leg. Another one? Elias nodded. Mailbox color this time. Marcus let out a breath. Is there even a rule about that? Elias didn't answer. They both knew Karen didn't care whether the rule existed or not. She cared about pressure. She cared about bending people until they broke. For months, maybe even years, residents had simply accepted it. But her mistake was assuming Elias was another quiet, powerless face in the crowd. He picked up the maintenance tablet again and powered it on. The diagnostic logs he'd pulled earlier were still displayed on the screen, a snippet of data proving an override attempt from the master key. He studied it again, not because he doubted it, but because he wanted to be absolutely certain nothing was missing. Marcus leaned over his shoulder. That's her override code, right? Yes. And she didn't erase it? She erased the surface log, Elias said, not the secondary trace. Marcus smirked. She really doesn't know who she's dealing with. Elias didn't smile back. Most people don't understand how much a system remembers. Even when you think you've erased something, it leaves shadows. He tapped open another screen, reviewing the timestamps of door diagnostics across the entire block. Karen had used the master key on several homes recently, something she would have to answer for later. But Elias wasn't gathering evidence for the neighborhood, not yet. First, he was building the foundation for exposing her pattern against them. A soft vibration buzzed on the counter, Elias's phone lighting up with a text from an unknown number. He opened it and found a simple message. We need to talk. P.C. Philip Crane, the HOA vice president, the conflicted board member who had looked uneasy during Karen's last visit. Marcus frowned. He reaching out now? Looks like it. You trust him? Not yet, Elias said. But he's watching her closely. That's a start. Before he could type a reply, another set of footsteps sounded outside. Not hurried, not angry, just uncertain. Elias opened the door to find Mrs. Alden, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, holding a small envelope in her trembling hands. I'm sorry to bother you, she said softly, but I didn't know who else to come to. Elias invited her inside with a gentle nod. She settled at the table, placing the envelope in front of her. Inside was a violation notice so absurd that even Marcus let out an incredulous breath. Seasonally inappropriate decorative colors. Her wreath had pastel flowers. Karen wanted neutral winter tones. It was petty, it was humiliating, and it proved everything Elias already knew. She threatened to fine me, Mrs. Alden whispered. I've lived here 22 years. No one ever treated me like this. Elias listened carefully, then asked, Has she entered your home? Mrs. Alden paled. She asked last week, said she needed to check for safety hazards. I thought, maybe she had that right, but I saw her walk out with my mail. She said she was collecting misplaced items. Marcus stiffened. She stole from you? Mrs. Alden shook her head quickly. I don't know if she meant it that way. I don't feel safe. Elias leaned forward slightly. Thank you for telling me. Did you save the notice? Mrs. Alden reached into her cardigan and handed it over. Elias added it to the growing pile. After she left, Marcus sat heavily on the couch. This is bigger than us. I know. Then why start with just our case? Elias met his son's eyes. Because if you want to expose someone thoroughly, you don't start wide, you start precise, focused, unshakable. When one truth is undeniable, every connected truth becomes undeniable. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding his father's method. Elias spent the rest of the afternoon scanning the notices into the tablet, screenshotting timestamps, organizing each piece with military precision. But the real breakthrough came when he opened the system's maintenance subserver, a space only he could access due to his technical clearance. There, the door logs for the night before revealed something new. A failed authentication attempt at 7:16 p.m., followed by a successful override at 7:17, followed by a sensor displacement at 7:18. Marcus had been right about the sound he heard. Elias leaned back, letting the sequence settle in his mind. 3 events, 3 verifiable logs, 3 actions Karen couldn't deny. He labeled the folder Integrity Packet Stage 1. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Stage 1? Truth has stages, Elias said quietly, and this is just the beginning. He closed the tablet and Set it aside. The first piece of the victory strategy, evidence gathering, was officially complete. The foundation was solid. Now came the escalation, the part where Karen would push too far and force the momentum straight into Elias's hands. He looked toward the window where Karen's SUV now sat parked across the street, engine idling. "She knows something's coming," Marcus murmured. "Yes," Elias said, "but she doesn't know how ready we already are." Karen's SUV idled across the street long enough for the engine's low hum to become part of the background noise of the neighborhood. Eventually she pulled away, but Elias didn't relax. Her retreat wasn't surrender. It was repositioning. People like her never backed down. They recalculated. And after the integrity packet he had assembled the night before, he knew she wouldn't rest until she found a way to regain control. Marcus paced the living room, the brace on his leg catching faint light as he moved. "She's not watching us, Dad. She's watching the neighborhood. She wants to know who's talking." Elias nodded. "That's exactly what she's doing. She's trying to see if anyone else is siding against her." Marcus stopped pacing. "Are they?" "Not openly," Elias said. "Not yet." He gathered the pile of notices from the table and placed them neatly into a folder. Everything had its place. Everything formed part of the narrative he would present at the review meeting. But one thing remained unfinished. The final confirmation of the override. He had the shadow data. He had the time stamps. He had the displacement sensor reading. What he didn't have yet was proof Karen had used the key physically, not just digitally. That was the missing piece, one that would come from the lock itself. He walked to the door again and crouched. The scrape was visible under daylight, but he needed more than a photograph. He needed the pattern. When someone manually inserted a key during an override, they often twisted too hard, leaving a torque mark on the internal cylinder. He took a small screwdriver and removed the outer ring with smooth, practiced movements. Marcus watched from behind him. "You really think she left something inside?" "I think she rushed," Elias said. "And when people rush, they leave a signature." He removed the cylinder and tilted it toward the light. There it was. A micro gouge along the inner curve, fresh, sharp, and unmistakable. He set the cylinder down, photographed it, then photographed the mark through the screwdriver's reflection, capturing the precise angle. Marcus whistled softly. "That's solid, Dad." "It's trace evidence," Elias said, "but with the logs, it creates a chain." He reassembled the lock with the same careful precision, ensuring nothing appeared disturbed. Evidence wasn't evidence if it could be argued as tampered with. He documented the steps, the angles, even the light source, the kind of thoroughness that made past investigations airtight. Just as he finished, his phone buzzed again. Another message from Philip Crane. "Need to speak today. Important. Trust me." Elias set the phone down without replying immediately. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're not meeting him?" "Not yet," Elias said. "I need to know why he's reaching out before I give him anything." "You think he's on our side?" "I think he's conflicted," Elias said. "And conflicted people can be useful if you know how to read them." He slid the phone into his pocket. "But first, we confirm everything else. She won't survive this meeting unless our evidence is irrefutable." Before Marcus could ask what else needed confirming, someone knocked on the door, sharp, quick, insistent, not Karen's rhythm. Elias opened it and found a young man from 2 blocks down, breathless, holding a small slip of paper. Are you Mr. Ward?" he asked. "Yes." The young man held out the slip. "I got this from the HOA office this morning. It's ridiculous, but I heard what she did here." The violation was laughable. Driveway alignment inconsistency. It confirmed everything Elias suspected. Karen was casting her net wider, trying to overwhelm the neighborhood before anyone gathered enough courage to stand up to her. "Thank you for bringing this," Elias said. "You're not alone." The young man nodded gratefully and hurried off. Marcus stared after him. "Dad, she's unraveling." "She's overreaching," Elias corrected. "An overreach is the beginning of exposure." He returned to the kitchen table and opened the maintenance tablet one more time. But this time, instead of viewing cloud-stored data, he accessed something deeper. Local node logs. Each smart lock connected to both a cloud server and a physical node inside the community's central utility shed. Most people didn't know the shed stored backup logs. Most people didn't even know there was a backup network at all. But Elias had set up that node during his first months on the job. He navigated through the system, isolating the exact time window of the break-in. The node revealed something the cloud didn't. A ping from the master key itself. Not the override command, not the entry attempt. The physical identification code belonging to the key. The signature code tied to a single access card. Karen's. Marcus leaned in, eyes widening. "That's the smoking gun?" Elias didn't smile. He simply saved the log, exported the metadata, and placed it into the folder labeled Integrity Packet Stage 2. Now he had everything. The physical scrape, the displacement sensor, the override code, the failed authentication, the successful override, and now the key signature, 6 pieces, 1 chain, 0 ways out for her. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Elias stepped outside and watched. The neighborhood in its usual quiet rhythm. Kids rode bikes, dogs barked, sprinklers clicked. But something beneath the surface had shifted. People were watching the HOA office with wary eyes. Some avoided the main path altogether. Others whispered near mailboxes. Marcus came to stand beside him. "So what now?" he asked softly. Elias kept his gaze steady on the street. "Now," he said, "we let her make her next mistake, and we make sure the neighborhood sees the truth when it happens." He turned back toward the house, folder in hand. Stage 2 was complete. Stage 3 would begin with her next move, because people who abuse power never stop themselves. Elias didn't have to wait long for Karen's next mistake. It came the very next morning, exactly as he expected, wrapped not in aggression, but in something far more dangerous. False calm. People like her always shifted strategies when they sensed resistance. Confrontation turned into charm. Control turned into concern. And the moment he heard her voice drifting across the front yard, he knew she was about to test a new angle. He stepped onto the porch just as she approached, with a forced smile stretched across her face. 2 board members followed her again. But this time, she had chosen different ones. She was rotating them the way someone rotated pieces on a chessboard, trying to create the illusion of consensus. "Oh, good morning," she chirped, as if she hadn't spent the past week pushing violations under his door. "I wanted to clear up any misunderstandings." Marcus, positioned just behind the entryway, exchanged a look with his father. If Karen was smiling, it meant she felt threatened. Elias kept his posture relaxed. "What misunderstanding do you think we have?" Her smile tightened, just barely. "Well, rumors have begun circulating about an incident here, and I wanted you to know that the board is committed to fairness. Fairness from her. And," she added brightly, "to ensure transparency, I've scheduled a community walkthrough today. We want everyone to feel safe." Translation: she wanted to reassert dominance. Elias nodded once, giving her nothing. "Do what you need to do." Her eyes flickered. "Of course, and just so you know, any interference with HOA processes will be taken seriously." He didn't respond, and his silence unsettled her more than any argument could have. She turned to leave, gesturing for her entourage to follow. But this time, she wasn't the only one being watched. 3 neighbors had paused along the sidewalk, arms crossed, listening without pretending otherwise. And when she passed them, they didn't greet her. Small shifts, important ones. When she was out of earshot, Marcus stepped forward. "She's losing it." "No," Elias said, closing the door behind them. "She's realizing she's being watched, and she hates that more than losing control." He placed the integrity packet folder on the table again and opened it. The pieces were complete, but he wasn't satisfied with exposing just the break-in. He wanted the pattern, the behavior, the context. He wanted to dismantle the illusion she'd built around herself. To do that, he needed one more step. The witness. Not Marcus, not the neighbors. Someone inside the HOA. Someone who'd seen the way she manipulated authority. Someone conflicted, but reachable. His phone buzzed again. Philip Crane. Another message. "If you're willing, meet me behind the clubhouse at noon. No one can see us talk." Marcus leaned in. "That's today?" Elias nodded. She scheduled the walkthrough to distract the neighborhood. "He wants to talk while she's busy." "You going?" "Yes." "Should I come?" No, Elias said. You stay here. If she tries anything else, I need you to witness it. Marcus didn't push. Be careful. Elias appreciated that. His son was trained for danger, but danger wasn't the concern here. Manipulation was. Perception was. And he had to handle that with strategy, not force. He left the house a few minutes before noon. The clubhouse sat at the center of Hawthorne Ridge, surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and identical flower beds, Karen's pride and joy. Behind it, a narrow walkway curved toward a maintenance gate. That's where Philip waited, hands tucked in his pockets, eyes darting around nervously. Thanks for coming, Philip said immediately. Elias nodded. You said it was important. It is. Philip took a breath. I'm not here to defend her. I'm here because things have gone too far. I've tried talking to her, but she doesn't listen to anyone. She believes she's untouchable. People like her usually do. Philip exhaled. I know what she did to your home. I saw the locked report she filed, and I saw the timestamps. They don't match her statement. They wouldn't. Elias already knew that, but hearing it from a board member gave the information new weight. Why come to me? Elias asked. Because you're not reacting emotionally, Philip said. Most residents yell or threaten legal action, but you're doing something else, and frankly, that scares her. That was good. Fear made people reckless. Philip continued, lowering his voice. She's planning something for the meeting next week, something she thinks will shut everything down before it starts. Elias raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? She's trying to rewrite the access log policy. She wants to classify it as internal officer-only data, meaning nothing from the main or backup network can be used by residents as evidence. Marcus's suspicions had been right. Karen wasn't retreating. She was preparing to erase everything, systematically. But she didn't know the crucial fact. Elias didn't store the evidence in HOA servers. It was on his own devices. And even if she changed the policy didn't override the state's trespass laws. Philip looked around again. If you have anything against her, use it at the meeting, and don't go easy. She won't. I don't plan to. Philip nodded, relieved. Good. Because the neighborhood needs someone to stand up to her. I just can't be the one to do it publicly yet. You already have, Elias said, by coming here. Philip's shoulders sagged, a sign of both guilt and relief. Then I hope it's enough. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The meeting ended on that quiet acknowledgement. One man stepping aside, another stepping forward. On his walk home, Elias saw Karen leading her community walkthrough, pointing at shrubs and mailboxes while residents followed reluctantly. Her voice carried easily across the lawn, sharp, demanding, authoritative, but her posture had changed. She kept glancing toward houses, toward him, toward anything she couldn't control. She sensed shift. She sensed doubt. She sensed threat. But she hadn't seen the evidence yet. When Elias stepped back into his home, Marcus met him instantly. So, she's preparing to erase the trail, Elias said. So we get ahead of her. Marcus nodded. What's next? Elias placed the integrity packet on the table and tapped it once. Next, he said, we prepare for the meeting, and we make sure she can't outrun the truth. Elias kept his hand resting on the integrity folder long after he spoke the words that set Part 7 in motion. The house felt charged now, filled with a quiet tension that wasn't fear, it was preparation. Marcus stood across from him, arms folded, gaze steady, waiting for the next move. The meeting with Philip had changed things. It didn't soften their resolve, it sharpened it. They now knew Karen wasn't just panicking, she was strategizing, and that meant Elias needed to stay 3 steps ahead. He opened the folder and began organizing everything into a clean, chronological sequence. Not just the digital evidence, but the atmospheric context, the timeline, the list of residents she'd targeted, the moments she slipped. Patterns were powerful. Patterns made truth undeniable. And patterns were something Elias understood better than anyone who had ever sat in the HOA office. We're not just proving she broke in, he said, speaking mostly to himself. We're proving she used her power as a weapon. Marcus moved closer. So, how do we make sure everyone sees it that way? Elias slid the folder aside and opened the maintenance tablet again. We don't show them anger, we show them clarity. Marcus nodded, But before he could respond, someone knocked at the door, not aggressively, not timidly, carefully. Elias glanced through the peephole and saw Mrs. Alden again, clutching something to her chest. He opened the door gently. She stepped inside, her eyes darting toward the street. "I didn't want to come," she whispered quickly, "but she's trying something." Elias guided her to the table. "What happened?" "She held a meeting this morning, not the main one, the informal one she tries to use to intimidate people." Mrs. Alden's voice trembled. "She told us the security logs would soon be restricted and that residents would need her approval to request them." Marcus cursed under his breath. Elias stayed calm. "Did she tell the board?" he asked. "She said she was the board," Mrs. Alden replied bitterly. "Said everyone needs to trust leadership. But the way she said it, it felt like a warning." Elias nodded. "It was." Mrs. Alden hesitated before sliding something across the table, a violated notice, freshly printed. "She put this on my door after the meeting," she said. "I wasn't even home. She didn't knock. She just stuck it there." The notice accused her of repeated non-compliance and disruptive community behavior. It was unhinged, and it was exactly the kind of escalation Elias had expected. "Thank you," he said softly. "This helps more than you know." She left shortly after, her shoulders hunched in the same defeated posture Dre had carried. As the door closed, Marcus turned to his father. "She's trying to scare everyone quiet. And it's working," Elias said, "for now." He placed the new notice inside the folder. The pile was becoming impossible to ignore. Every new piece strengthened the chain. Every escalation revealed her desperation. Marcus paced again. "So when do we loop the neighbors in? You said they're watching." "Not yet," Elias replied. "If we involve them now, she'll retaliate harder, and she'll know exactly who's slipping away from her control." Marcus stopped pacing. "Then what's the next move?" "We secure redundancy," Elias said. He opened the laptop he rarely used, older but reliable, and began duplicating the integrity packet, not just once, 3 times, onto 2 encrypted drives and a cloud folder under a name no one would suspect. Years of intelligence work had taught him one rule. If evidence could be destroyed, it would be. Marcus watched silently. Elias could feel the question lingering in the air. Was this too much for a neighborhood dispute? But this wasn't a dispute anymore. This was violation, manipulation, coercion. Abuses that people ignored until someone forced them to look. Once the files were backed up, Elias pushed the drives into separate folders. "She'll try to rewrite the policy tonight or tomorrow," he said. "We need to be ready before she does." Before they could continue, a text from Philip arrived. "She's planning to meet with her inner circle tonight. She thinks she can shut down any access queries before next week." Marcus read the message over his father's shoulder. "She's really trying to erase everything. She thinks control equals safety," Elias said. "But control without accountability is fear, and fear is loud." After sending Philip a brief acknowledgement, Elias stood and walked to the front window. Karen's SUV wasn't there, but a different car was. One of her board allies. They were speaking to 2 neighbors in hushed tones, pointing toward Elias's house. Marcus moved beside him. "They're trying to flip the neighborhood against us. For now," Elias said. "But this isn't the time to fight it head on." "So what's the time for?" "Preparation." They moved to the dining table where Elias began drafting a clean, concise summary of the evidence, one that could be explained clearly at the meeting. Marcus watched the methodical process with admiration. Every word Elias wrote was measured, not emotional, not inflammatory, just truth. That was why this strategy would work. Truth didn't need theatrics. As evening settled, the house remained lit, not with urgency, but with purpose. Elias finished labeling the last document, closed the folder, and exhaled softly, a controlled release of tension. Marcus leaned on the table. "Is this enough to take her down?" "It's enough to expose her," Elias said. "And once truth is out in public, power shifts." He looked toward the window once more. "And people like her don't survive shifts." Before bed, Marcus paused in the hallway. "You ever think this would happen here, in a quiet neighborhood?" "No," Elias said evenly. "But trouble finds the places where people stop paying attention." Marcus nodded once. "Then let's make sure they start paying attention." A small, confident smile pulled at the corner of Elias's mouth. That's exactly the plan. By the way, subscribe if you're following this crazy ride. Things are about to turn. Even after Marcus went to bed, the last words he spoke lingered in the air. Make sure they start paying attention. Elias stood alone in the quiet living room, the integrity packet resting on the table like the centerpiece of everything they'd endured. Outside, the neighborhood was dim, calm, and unaware of how close it was to finally seeing the truth. He checked the blinds once more, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. In his old life, vigilance wasn't fear, it was preparation. When morning broke, it arrived not with calm, but with a new form of tension. A different car rolled past their home, one Elias recognized instantly. It belonged to one of the senior board members, someone Karen relied on heavily for approval votes. The man wasn't stopping by to check on residents. He was scouting, testing reactions, watching Elias's house. Elias watched him just long enough to collect the pattern. Slow pass, slow roll of the window, quick glance toward the property, then a retreat down the street. Marcus stepped beside him. She's trying to figure out who's siding with us. She's trying to see if we're scared, Elias corrected. Are we? No. He closed the blinds with a quiet finality. Later that afternoon, the neighborhood group chat lit up. Residents were posting questions, small ones at first, then bolder. Why are we getting so many violation notices? Anyone else feel like the rules changed overnight? Why are the logs going private? Is the board allowed to do that? And then the one that mattered, does anyone know what's going on with the wards? Elias saw it. Marcus saw it. They didn't respond, but they didn't need to. The ripple was spreading. Marcus stretched his leg and sat up straighter. They're catching on, Dad. Not enough yet, Elias said. They need proof before they'll believe their instincts. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. Philip, she's rewriting the log policy tonight. She wants it finalized before the main meeting. Elias nodded slowly. It was exactly on schedule. People who felt power slipping always rushed to grab more. What's the plan? Marcus asked. We get ahead of it with visibility. He grabbed the integrity folder and duplicated it onto a printed summary. Clean lines, factual wording, nothing dramatic. It wasn't for the board. It was for the residents who needed something tangible. Before he finished, another knock sounded at the door, hesitant, almost guilty. Elias opened it to find Dre again, clutching a printed violation in his hand. This one says, I violated community harmony, the man whispered. What does that even mean? Marcus looked outraged, but Elias motioned for calm. Come inside. Dre stepped in, his eyes darting nervously. Is this happening to everyone now? Yes, Elias said. She's trying to drown the neighborhood in noise. In the military, they called this saturation pressure, forcing so much confusion that people broke before they realized what was happening. Dre glanced at the organized pile of evidence on the table and whispered, You're building something, aren't you? Elias didn't lie. Something truthful, Dre swallowed. If you need a witness for anything I've seen, I'll speak up. That mattered more than Dre knew. Conflicted allies were useful. Willing witnesses were powerful. Thank you, Elias said. Your voice will matter. Dre nodded and left quickly, as if afraid Karen's shadow might reach across the lawn. When the door closed, Marcus looked at his father again. They're coming to you because they trust you. No, Elias said. They're coming because they don't trust her anymore. Trust isn't about liking someone. It's about believing someone won't lie to you when everything falls apart. He returned to the table, assembling the final subsection of the integrity packet, a summary of resident experiences, documented violations, timestamps, and correlating behavior patterns. Even though the main case was the break-in, establishing pattern made the truth. Bigger than one incident, it showed motive. That was the spine of the victory strategy. Public exposure backed with irrefutable evidence. As evening approached, something shifted in the neighborhood. People lingered outside longer. They walked slower. They moved in groups rather than alone. Eyes lifted to windows more often. It was the subtle awakening Elias had predicted, a collective sense that something wasn't right. Karen emerged eventually, clipboard in hand as always, but this time her steps were sharper. She walked toward the clubhouse where lights glowed inside despite it being late. Philip must have been there too, preparing for the rewrite of the log policy. Marcus came to stand beside Elias at the window. She looks nervous. She is, Elias said. She thinks she can stop the truth with paperwork. Can she? No, Elias replied. Paperwork is only powerful when the facts support it. They watched Karen enter the clubhouse, her posture rigid, her voice sharp as she spoke to the board members waiting inside. Then something unexpected happened. A group of residents gathered outside the clubhouse, casually at first, then purposefully. Neighbors who'd received violations, neighbors who'd heard rumors, neighbors who were tired of quietly enduring. They weren't confronting anyone yet. They were watching, and that changed everything. "She's losing the room," Marcus whispered. "No," Elias said quietly. "She's losing the illusion." He stepped away from the window and picked up the integrity folder. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "they'll see everything." Marcus nodded. "And after that?" "After that," Elias said, "she won't have anywhere left to hide." He turned off the living room light, leaving only the soft glow of the hallway lamp. The calm before the storm had officially ended. Morning arrived with a heaviness that didn't feel like fear. It felt like momentum, the kind of weight that told Elias the neighborhood had finally tipped from quiet suspicion into collective awareness. He stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee, watching through the window as clusters of residents gathered near driveways, speaking in low, pointed tones. Marcus joined him, bracing himself against the counter, his expression alert. "Today's the meeting," Marcus said quietly. "She's going to fight like hell." "She'll try," Elias replied, "but she's lost control of the narrative." He lifted the integrity packet, its contents crisp and ordered, proof of a break-in, proof of override attempts, timestamps, sensor displacement, violation patterns, resident accounts. It was complete, not flashy, not emotional, just truth. And truth didn't need permission to stand. By late morning, messages began buzzing through the neighborhood group chat. "Are we attending the meeting? Is this about the new violation policy? Something's wrong with the HOA logs. Anyone else? Noticing? I heard the wards know something." Marcus looked up. "They're starting to circle around us." "They're starting to look for answers," Elias corrected. "Let them." He didn't respond in the chat. He didn't need to. Reveals were only powerful when delivered at the right moment, where everyone could witness the impact. Around noon, Philip sent another text. "She's rewriting the access policy today. She thinks once it's signed, no one can question her authority." Elias responded with a single line, "Let her finish." Philip didn't question it. He'd already seen enough of Elias's methodical calm to understand it wasn't passivity. It was strategy. A few hours later, Karen emerged from the clubhouse with a folder in her hand, chin lifted high. She looked triumphant. That was good. Let her confidence peak. Let her believe she'd sealed every crack. Marcus watched her through the blinds. "She thinks she won." "That's exactly what she needs to think," Elias said, slipping the duplicate USB drive into his pocket. Late afternoon arrived. Neighbors drifted toward the community clubhouse, some with folded arms, some whispering, some clearly anxious. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the path. Marcus walked beside his father, slow because of his brace, but steady. Elias kept his pace matched with his son's, the integrity folder tucked under his arm. When they reached the clubhouse, the parking area was full, more attendees than usual, many more. This wasn't a routine meeting. This was anticipation. Something in the air felt electric, almost sharp. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Karen stood at the front of the room, with the board positioned behind her like a decorative backdrop. Her smile was polished, artificial, and stretched just a little too tight. "Welcome everyone," she announced, voice projecting authority she no longer fully possessed. "We have important updates today, including new protocols regarding safety logs and HOA oversight." A few residents exchanged uneasy glances. She continued. "As of this morning, I have implemented a policy update. Security logs will now be classified as internal documentation. Residents may no longer request them independently." A murmur rose from the crowd. Concern, confusion, irritation. Karen raised a hand. "It's for your protection." Marcus leaned toward his father. "And there it is." Elias remained still. Karen continued. "Additionally, due to recent circulating misinformation, I want to clarify that no HOA officer has acted outside authorized boundaries. Any such claims are unfounded." That was the moment Elias chose to step forward. "Is that so?" he asked calmly. The room shifted, heads turned. Even Karen stiffened, though she tried to disguise it with a smile. "Mr. Ward," she said, overly sweet. "If you have questions, you can submit them for board review." He shook his head slightly. "No, I think the board and the neighborhood should hear this now." She hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. Elias placed the integrity folder on the table at the front of the room. "For the record," he said, voice clear, "your new policy doesn't protect residents. It protects you." A ripple went through the room. Karen forced a laugh. "I'm sure you're mistaken." "Then let's review the data," Elias said. He opened the folder and laid out the first set of printed logs, timestamps of the override attempt. Karen's face paled. He continued, placing down the sensor displacement reading, then the failed authentication, then the override command, then the physical torque mark from the lock. Murmurs grew louder. "I also recovered the signature ping from the master key," Elias said. "Your key." Philip stepped forward, visibly conflicted but finally resolute. "The signature is real," he confirmed. "I checked." Karen spun toward him. "Philip, what are you doing?" "Being honest," he said. The room erupted with whispers. Residents leaned forward. Dre and Mrs. Alden stared in shock. Karen stepped back, color draining from her face. "This is fabricated," she snapped. "He manipulated—" Elias didn't raise his voice. "I documented every step, and I backed the evidence up on multiple drives. You can't erase it. Not from the cloud, not from the node, not from my property." The room fell silent. Completely silent. Then Dre spoke. "She filed a violation on me for lawn edging. I've lived here 15 years without one problem." Mrs. Alden added, trembling, "She entered my home." Another resident. "She tried to find me for parking in my own driveway." Another. "She took my mail." Voices piled on. A wave, a shift, a collective breaking point. Karen tried to shout over them, but the noise drowned her out. Board members exchanged looks of panic. Philip finally raised his voice. "Karen Lockridge," he said firmly. "Based on the evidence presented and the pattern of abuse demonstrated by residents, I move for your immediate suspension pending a full investigation." The board didn't even hesitate. All hands went up. Karen stared at them in disbelief, eyes wide, breath shallow. Elias watched her quietly. Her downfall wasn't dramatic. It was truthful, and truth was louder than authority. The clubhouse didn't move for a long breath after every board member raised their hand against Karen. It was the kind of silence that felt like a vacuum, pulling every ounce of tension, denial, and illusion out of the room. Karen stood frozen at the front, her clipboard hanging loosely at her side, fingers trembling. She opened her mouth once, twice, but no words came out. For the first time since stepping into the neighborhood, she looked small, cornered, exposed. When she finally managed to speak, her voice cracked. You can't suspend me. I am the HOA. Everything I've done?" "No," Philip interrupted, his tone firmer than anyone had ever heard from him. "You are a member of the HOA, and members follow the rules. You broke them." Gasps rippled across the room, louder than before. A few residents even nodded in support. That was the moment Karen realized she didn't just lose her authority, she'd lost the crowd. She took a single step backward. "This is a setup. Ward manipulated all of you." "He didn't manipulate anyone," Mrs. Alden said sharply from the front row. Her voice didn't shake this time. "You've been intimidating us for months." Another resident added, "You've been abusing power, Karen." "And you lied," someone else said. "And you trespassed. And you threatened people. And you thought we wouldn't notice." Voices piled on, not chaotic, unified. A community finally waking up after being suffocated under her leadership. Still, Karen fought. "This is all circumstantial. You can't prove—" Elias stepped forward, calm and controlled. "It wasn't one action," he said. "It was a pattern, and patterns don't lie." Marcus watched from the back of the room, his posture steady, jaw tight. He wasn't just defending his home. He was witnessing it reclaim itself. Elias glanced at him briefly before turning back to the room. Philip raised his clipboard. "Effective immediately. Karen Lockridge is suspended pending a third-party audit." Karen's voice rose, shrill, desperate. "I built this neighborhood. This is my community, my authority." "No," Elias said softly but clearly enough for the entire room to hear. "This community belongs to the people who live here." She spun toward him, face twisting with pure venom. "You! All of this started with you. You think you're some kind of hero?" Elias didn't blink. "No, just a man protecting his home." The words landed heavier than anything else that evening. Someone opened the clubhouse doors behind her. The night breeze blew in, cold and sharp. Karen's eyes darted around the room, realizing there was nothing left for her to salvage. No supporters, no allies, no illusions to hide behind. "This isn't over," she hissed, voice low and trembling. "I'll appeal this. I'll come back stronger." Elias held her gaze. The truth doesn't bend to appeals. With that, she finally fled the clubhouse, leaving chaos behind her. The door shut, silence again. But this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was relief. Slowly, residents began speaking, quietly at first. "Is it really happening? She's gone? Is he staying on the board? What's the next step?" Philip stepped forward again, clearing his throat. "Everyone, please take your seats. We still have to complete the vote, assign interim responsibilities, and discuss implementation of an independent review." People gradually settled. Elias didn't return to his seat. He remained, standing near the front, not dominating the room, but anchoring it. Marcus moved closer, standing just behind him, present, steady, watchful. Philip addressed the crowd. "Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge something important. None of this would have come to light without Mr. Ward." Elias didn't react. He didn't need praise. Philip continued. "Most people would have lashed out or turned this into a feud, but he documented everything, respected the process, and protected the community by exposing wrongdoing with facts, not anger." Residents murmured again, this time with gratitude. Mrs. Alden wiped tears. "You saved us from her." Dre nodded. "Yeah, you really did." Elias spoke quietly. "I didn't save anyone. I just made sure the truth wasn't ignored." Marcus stepped up beside him. He did what leaders are supposed to do, even when they don't want the spotlight. That statement landed with more weight than most realized. The residents exchanged looks, respectful looks. Philip went on. "I'd like to motion for adding Mr. Ward as interim compliance advisor during the audit. His technical knowledge—" Elias raised a hand gently. "No." The room stilled. "I didn't come here to join the board. I came here to live quietly with my son. But I'm willing to assist, for transparency only." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Philip nodded. "Then consider that accepted. You'll act independently and with full access to documentation during the audit." Elias didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased. The meeting continued. Votes were cast. Temporary leadership was assigned. New oversight measures were introduced. Residents asked questions openly for the first time in months. And every few moments their eyes drifted back to Elias. Not with expectation, but with newfound trust. When the meeting finally concluded, residents approached him in small groups, thanking him, offering support, sharing their own stories. Elias listened to each of them with quiet patience. Outside, the night air was cool, almost cleansing. Marcus walked beside him as they stepped into the parking lot, the clubhouse lights fading behind them. "You did it," Marcus said. "We did what was necessary," Elias corrected. "Feels good, though." "It feels right." They reached their car, and Marcus leaned against the door. "Tomorrow's going to be different." "Yes," Elias answered. "Tomorrow, the neighborhood starts healing." They drove home under the dim streetlights, two silhouettes returning to a house that no longer felt targeted, but defended. A home reclaimed. The drive home was quiet, in a way Elias hadn't felt in months. Not the tense kind of quiet, the kind that settles after a storm has finally passed. The street lamps shimmered over their lane as they pulled into the driveway, and Marcus exhaled a long, slow breath, the kind that only comes when a burden finally leaves. Your shoulders. Elias stepped out first, scanning instinctively out of habit, but the neighborhood didn't carry the same weight anymore. No shadows watching, no clipboard-wielding silhouette patrolling, just houses, homes, resting under the stillness of night. "Feels different," Marcus said as he walked to the porch. "It is different," Elias replied, "because people finally saw what was happening. Inside, the house felt warmer than usual, not physically, emotionally. The sense of intrusion that had once poisoned every room had finally lifted. Elias placed the integrity folder on the table. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to protect it. The truth had already been freed. Marcus sank onto the couch, rubbing his knee. So, what happens next? The audit, the temporary board, new oversight, Elias said. They'll fix the policies she broke. And Karen? Elias paused. She'll face her consequences, first from the HOA, then legally if necessary. Marcus nodded, thoughtful. Do you think she'll try anything? I mean, retaliation? No, Elias said, and he meant it. People like her don't thrive in sunlight. Now that everything is out in the open, she has nowhere left to hide. Hours later, the neighborhood chat pinged again. This time, the messages felt lighter. Thank you for speaking up. Glad that nightmare is over. We should host a cookout this weekend. Something normal. Tell your son we appreciate him too. Marcus read a few and smiled. Think we'll actually get invited to things now? Elias smirked. Maybe. But deeper than that was a different truth. The community was rebuilding trust, not just with him, but with itself. The next morning, the neighborhood felt alive. People waved when Elias walked to the curb to retrieve the trash bins. Mrs. Alden brought muffins as a thank you. Dre stopped by to ask genuine questions about improving his lawn instead of apologizing for it. The air felt lighter, kinder. Later that afternoon, Philip arrived at the door, not hiding behind secrecy this time. He looked worn but relieved. Just wanted to say, "Thank you," Philip said. "What you did last night, it gave the rest of us permission to do the right thing." Elias nodded. "I didn't do it for permission. I did it because it needed to be done." "I know," Philip said softly. "That's why it worked." He handed Elias a sealed envelope. "These are the temporary audit details. You'll have full neutrality and access. And, just so you know, the rest of the board supports you, even the ones who were scared to speak up." Elias accepted it with a quiet nod. "I'll keep things fair." "I know you will," Philip replied. "That's why we asked." When Philip left, Marcus stepped into the doorway behind him. "You trust him?" "I trust that he learned something," Elias said, "and sometimes that's enough." As days passed, the audit process began, but it wasn't intrusive. Residents were cooperative. Documentation flowed, and without Karen looming over everything, people actually spoke honestly. Stories emerged, small violations, quiet coercions, petty abuses she'd masked as community standards. Every testimony made the broader pattern undeniable. The final report wasn't written by Elias. He refused that position, but his findings contributed to it. The outcome was clear. Karen's authority was stripped permanently. She would no longer hold any leadership title in the community. Several complaints were forwarded to local authorities for potential charges related to unlawful entry and misuse of HOA authority. Justice, not revenge, landed cleanly. One evening, during their walk around the neighborhood, Marcus looked thoughtful. "You think we can actually enjoy living here now?" "Why not?" Elias asked. "Peace is something you only appreciate after chaos." "You did more than expose her," Marcus said quietly. "You helped everyone here breathe again." Elias didn't respond immediately. He watched the houses around them, warm lights glowing inside, families cooking dinner, laughter echoing faintly down the sidewalk. A neighborhood reclaimed. "What I did," he said, "is what any man should do when someone threatens his home. You confront truth with truth." Marcus smiled. "Most people don't know how." "That's why we lead quietly," Elias replied. They reached their porch, and for the first time in a long time, Elias didn't check the lock. He opened the door with ease, stepping into a home that felt safe again. A home earned. Later that night, as he glanced out the window, he saw the faint glow of porch lights across the street, neighbors sitting outside, talking, relaxed. No eyes filled with suspicion, no hostility, just community. Elias finally closed the curtain with a sense of calm he hadn't felt since moving in. The storm was over, and the truth had won. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. There's so much more ahead. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?